And we are live. Welcome to
All
the
right,
Heroes and
everybody.
Rogues live show. Friday. Let's go. It's been a heck of a week, and I'm ready to relax with a little bit of Rule of Cool.
Yeah, you're not going to relax with this topic because I'm not bought in on it.
Oh no.
As everybody, if in case people don't know, we do a live show. We like to talk theory, film theory in general on Fridays, and then kind of just we'll do a production little update at the end on our short film we've been working on, Tycho Decay. I'm Robert, producer for this, and that's Alec. He's going to be director. And last week we were talking about suspension of disbelief, and we had kind of been talking about why you shouldn't break it, and something that was kind of in the background there, not being mentioned, was the rule of cool, which is this rule that I'm not sure I buy in fully. Um,
Right.
but Alec is 100% gung ho about it, so he's here to try to convince me otherwise.
Yeah, I see a stream error, but it looks like it's still going on when I check it on my iPad here. So we're just gonna keep running with it, and if no one sees this, then we'll just redo it next week. All right. So the Rule of Cool. Yeah. So last week we spent the whole week pretty much talking about why you should respect your audience's intelligence, why you should have a consistent internal logic to your universe, and why you should break it only at your own peril, right? And this week I want to kind of change gears and talk about the opposite, which is when you can completely break all the rules and internal logic of your own story, and why that works. And the reason, the name of it, right, is the Rule of Cool, right? And the answer is, if something is cool enough, and cool doesn't have to just mean like, bad guys don't look, or good guys, cool guys don't look at explosions, right? It doesn't have to just be like sunglasses and explosions like the thumbnail. Um, Cool is like anything that the act itself is more, does more for the audience's buy-in than the rules, right? So there's various rules, there's various things that, hey, I have this internal logic, I can't jump over a cliff, right? Like there's that whole classic image, right, of the Rock trying to jump from one building to the other, um, in Skyscraper, I think it is. Rock jump.
Okay, while you're looking that up, let me
Yeah,
see if I understand the definition then, what you're going with,
yeah,
which is so like the let's say the audience is willing to forgive breaking rules
right,
or breaking with reality in the story that you've created as long as the result is cool enough.
exactly.
And like the more cooler it is, the more willing the more they are willing to accept the rule break, the less cool, the less they're willing to accept. Is that right?
Something like that, yeah. So the idea
Okay.
is essentially, if something is really interesting, right? If there, like when someone asks you why, you should have a why for anything you're doing in your film, right, or your story. So someone goes like, well, why did you do that there, or why did that character say that line? And you go, oh, okay, well, it's because it's from their backstory, because of this. And someone goes, well, why did you know the whatever character that they choose that outfit or whatever? So, and sometimes the answer is because it's cool. Like
Okay.
that's an
Okay.
okay answer to have
And
now and
so the
then.
example you've got up here is
So
Skyscraper, a
this
movie
is
I did not watch. Is
no,
this
I
The
know,
Rock?
not nobody watched it. Yeah, it's The Rock.
Okay.
Um,
And I guess this is like he should in the movie he makes it from I don't know whatever that's a crane it looks like
yeah,
to the window, but in reality it's showing three different types of trajectories
yeah.
that are
Like if he jumps upwards, he's just gonna fall down. If he jumps long, he's not gonna make it. Like there's no way in which he jumps and makes it to this window, right?
yeah.
Um, and so when you have something, when you have the Rule of Cool, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? So this is sort of an example of it not working. Um, but there's all sorts of things that are completely carried by the Rule of Cool without the internal logic necessarily working too well. I don't know if there's a better example than of this than really the entire 40K universe sort of exists on this Rule of Cool, which is like, hey, look, like there's no
We might give
consistency.
people epilepsy with this one.
Yeah, and I'll probably take it down. There's no consistency. There's not really a canon when it comes to Warhammer 40K. That's one of like the things that's kind of hard about it, and the makers of it has said this themselves. Like,
Hmm.
because it's all sort of rumor based. It's sort of like we don't really know what's real or what isn't at any given time. And so in that sense, they've built in this like ultimate consistency, which is like at any moment anything could change. And so for a lot of people, that's like very hard, right? For a lot of like purists of like sci-fi or art or whatever, it's like, hey, I need to know what happened before. I need to know why this is happening, what characters can and can't do. Therefore, that way I can know what the stakes are. Um, but there's also this sense that you
One
can kind of
second.
supersede. That's fine. You can supersede all this stuff
There we go. Good to go.
by appealing to this coolness factor, right? Um, and the audience will in fact accept it. Now, again, you do this at your peril, right? And I don't think you do this all the time. So I think like you might not be on board yet that you can even do this and get away with it. But the fact is, I think there's evidence, at least it might not work for you personally, but I think there's evidence that like it works as a whole for most audiences, right? There's a point where the audience will be like, "Well, I love that," and you will probably be like, "What? But this is this. What about that?" And
Yeah,
you're like, "But it
I'm
was
not saying the
cool."
rule doesn't exist.
Right.
I just don't know. I think that just because you're breaking it doesn't mean that it's like, oh, it's an acceptable thing. It's usually, well, yeah, you broke it, but if you hadn't broken it and found a more
Right.
creative way to do it, wouldn't that be better? And like, wouldn't that make
Right.
people like it's kind of like the John Wick thing. John Wick in the first movie it's super cool, and then by the fourth one you're like, okay, so like it's fun, it's cool, but it's like, yeah, they got
Right.
superpowers now. They got suits that take bullets and all that. So
Right. Yes. So there's all sorts um, of ways to break this rule, right? And ways that it doesn't work and ways that it does work, right? So I think that's, to me, that's really the conversation that's kind of interesting is where does it work and where does it not work? Where is it like worth kind of doing and where is it just you're like, okay, right? This whole thing is I'm now I can't get into this film because you've just been showing me a whole bunch of random stuff.
okay.
I think a film where it doesn't work in is what's that called? It's the planet hopping one. Shoot, based on based on it's like a French comic from back in the day. Um, Golly, what's it called?
I'm getting Mortal Engines right now,
No, I wish I had that in my
which is
things.
not even close. I don't
Anyways,
know.
I'll think of it later. I should have had it in the notes. But the fact is, um, there's like there's so many different ways to do this wrong, right? And I think that's what you're kind of like pointing out is there's like,
Yeah.
okay, dude, the rule of cool is fine and all, but like, how often does it just blow up in your face, right? So my kind of argument is it works best in a few situations, right? Like you can use it sparingly, but in the situation you should use it in is generally where either you don't have a lot of rules, right, is one way to use it, or in a place where you kind of have a small enough scope, right? I think that's generally where it works best.
Okay.
So
Give me one example.
yeah. So I just used the 40K example. That's kind of an example because generally 40K stories are kind of shorter. They're like one pieces, even though it's part of a much larger universe, right? But a
Yeah.
better example of something that's just purely cool.
Well, there's also not much 40K like film stuff out there. A lot of it's going to be like more book related, or
Right.
it's based off the tabletop stuff. So give me like a film specific type
Right. So one
example.
example that's one of my favorites that's come out recently is, uh, and I always forget how to say this one. Is it Hidari? Is that what it is?
You tell me. How, okay, but how is this breaking the rules of the world right now? Because the world that
Hidari.
they've set up is not
Oh, okay. I see
realistic.
what you're saying. I see what you're saying. Okay. So what
Yeah,
I'm
so
saying
I
is this is something that's just purely cool, right? And there
yeah.
aren't really a lot of rules, right? We don't really know what can and can't happen in this world, right? In this story. If you guys haven't watched this, go
Yeah,
watch
yeah,
it. It's amazing.
we're learning the rules as it's yeah. You don't sit down and say here's rule A, B, and C. I mean, you
Right.
could do that like like in our favorite film that we never stop talking about, I, Robot, where they
Right.
talk about the three rules of the three laws for robotics. But what I mean for that is, yeah, you're learning the rules as it goes along, and each layer is like, oh, that's really cool, that's really cool. So I get that, but I'm saying like, okay, the rule of cool is you're breaking the rules that you previously set up. So
Right.
like, give me
So
an
well,
example where it's
it's not
done well.
it's usually not previously set up. It's usually just you're doing something that's so ridiculous that like I shouldn't really be able to buy it, right? So
Okay.
I think probably the ultimate example is this one right here. This might get us demonetized, we'll see. But just the
Yeah, you
Legolas
can stop it. You can stop it.
shield surf. Well, we'll
Just
do
show the
one more
screenshot.
second. There you go.
People know what
So
it is. We can show a screenshot, and we don't
yeah,
have to worry about
that's
that.
the ultimate one is Legolas sliding down on a shield, literally pulling a skater move in the middle of a serious like a film about like war and death, and you're watching as
Yeah.
like Urukais are killing people. Legolas throws down the shield, he slides down the shield, he shoots like four Urks or orcs or whatever,
Oops.
Uruks. They all die, and then he's like jumps off it, and it goes into a dude's throat at the end. Every time I've seen that, I saw it in theaters multiple times, both extended and non-extension. The audience every single time cheers. No one goes, ugh. Which really your
Uh,
response should kind of be, what? Like, did he really just do what I think he did?
yeah,
It's so
it's
over
not
the
my
top.
favorite.
It's kind of inappropriate in a weird way, like for that film to be doing that. Like, could you imagine J.R. Tolkien, Tolkien sitting there watching
Oh
this and
yeah.
being like, what is he? Why is he sliding down a shield? Like, but everyone loves it,
It
right?
it does.
It's a
Yeah, it does
unanimously
take.
loved scene. And when you
I,
first saw it,
yeah.
what? When you first saw it, what'd you do?
Well, that's the thing is I don't want to say I'm passive when I'm first watching movies, but like I was also a small kid, like much
Yeah,
younger. I can't claim I was a kid. I
yeah.
was much younger, but I remember watching that and just being like, okay, in my brain, I was just like, okay, I'm
So
just
you're
taking it all
saying
on,
you've
taking it
always been
all
a
in.
curmudgeon.
But
You've
every time I see
always
it,
been
every time
curmudgeon.
I see it, I'm just like, ugh, it's it doesn't feel like it fits the gravity of the
So
situation,
I
and it
agree. I
and
agree.
I don't like that. I don't I recognize that they're kind of showing the elf thing, and I can see where they could justify it, so I can't completely hate it, but it is a
You're
bit of a
you're
like,
so you're coming at
okay.
it completely wrong, right? So like I hear you saying like I could see them justifying it. The justification is it's freaking cool. That's
Yeah,
the
I
justification.
do not
The
think that's a good
yes,
just.
the justification is that was awesome.
Okay,
I love that that happened. I like to have movies where things are interesting. And guess what? I didn't even I wasn't aware of the rules or cared about the rules because it was executed so well. The other thing though is they kind of earn it, right? Like they don't do that all the time, and they haven't done it nonstop, right? It's like
hmm
we're gonna have this one moment that's at the peak element of the peak moment of this battle, kind of where this character does this really over the top thing, right? Like nine
Yeah,
jumps the shark.
yeah,
um
okay,
and
okay.
so for me, I think what you should learn from that is like, okay, why did that one work versus why does literally like the literal jumping the shark, or why does that skyscraper jump, or why does another element that doesn't work, right? And so that's
Yeah.
what I try to study is like this seems to be unanimously loved as a scene. Besides Rob, who even when he was young was an
Do
old
not,
man.
do not mistake being curmudgeon with someone with high standards. Okay, I just have high standards.
Okay. But
Uh,
it's pretty much universal. So it's like, why does that work when, you know, whether it's Rebel Moon or the Creator or one of these other modern films does something kind of like, hey, isn't this cool? And you're like, no, that should have killed you. Or the Lord of the Star Wars, right? Like does this in Episode 8 a bunch where there's a bunch of kind of crazy cool scenes, but you're like, did that make me like it more, or did that make me kind of did it not work, right? Or at least the audience is split on it working, right? Versus here, it seems to work. So I try to figure out what the difference is, right? What's the
okay,
difference in these two scenarios? And I think it's one difference that I think is kind of fair, I would say, is sort of the earning of goodwill with the audience. Like, if you don't have goodwill built up, if you haven't already established your world, what's going on, or the characters being likable, and then you try to pull something like this, it's never going to work, no matter how cool it is, right? And that's what I think I've seen over and over again recently is new Marvel movies or new things keep trying to pull out these moments, and everyone goes, oh, it's just CGI garbage, and they blame, you know, all sorts of stuff. But really, I think the problem is you were never into it enough to enjoy this moment. So we've established Legolas is a badass. We've established that he's lighter than snow, right? He can do some supernatural stuff, right? Kind of like what you said, the excuse. But then we push it probably too far. But then what he does is cool enough to then like make it lock in essentially, right? That's more or less what I see happening there is if this was any other character in any other film, and they try to do it again with like, which is interesting. They try to do it in The Hobbit when he jumps from rock to rock as they're falling, and everyone unanimously in that one goes, "Oh, that was awful." But it's like, well, that's no less believable than him killing the Oliphant and sliding down its trunk and jumping off, or the
See, okay,
stairs.
that's
Wait, hold up. Neither of those are less believable or more believable, I should say, than the jumping from rock to rock one. We've already established he's super light and kind of magical. However, that movie you were not locked in already, and we hadn't really been hanging out with Legolas very much in that film either. He just kind of shows up at the end. So we aren't invested in the story. We're not invested in the character, and then the character does something ridiculous, and we go, "That's ridiculous." Versus when you're invested in the character and you're locked in, and you kind of can earn a moment or two like that. You can earn this moment where you go, "Okay, now I'm really going to push things, and I'm going to kind of even break these rules a little bit." But you have enough coverage, right, of like suspension of disbelief, of good storytelling, that then that's not so bad. So when what's his face, Bruce Willis jumps off a building holding onto a fire hose and then slides into
around him.
Yeah, it goes into the window below. You're not like, "That's stupid, that's dumb." It's like, I'm here for it, and you're here for it, and you love it, and you're interested in it because you already love this character, and you can almost do no wrong at this point, right? It's sort of like in a relationship when you already love somebody and they're already hilarious, and they tell like a really obnoxious joke. It's like, you're gonna laugh at it anyway. Versus if there's just somebody you already kind of hate and they do something doofy or annoying or awkward, you're just like, ugh, yikes. Versus, oh my gosh, dude, I can't believe you just said that. It's, dude, just stop.
Okay, so counterpoint though
Okay.
is all of this is putting the onus on the audience to going back to last
I think
week,
you earn
suspend their
it.
disbelief.
I said you earn it, right? You earn these moments by you yourself putting in the work, by having good characters, by doing this stuff. You get to this point where then you get to break the rules.
Okay, but then like the Oliphant scene in Return of the King is less accepted by people.
It's still pretty low in the theater. It works. I think it's there's a word for this. I can't remember the word, but it's the ghost of the stairs is what they call it in Germany. But it's that moment where you're in on the stairwell and you're like, "Oh, that's what I should have said," or that's what like it should have been. I think that's what often happens is like there's this thing that happens when you get home after the magic of being in the movie theater wears off, and you're like, "Did he really slide down the trunk of the elephant and jump off? Is that really what happened?"
Okay, I could see that, but that's kind of my point. The next time you watch it, you're like, "Oh, okay, you fooled me with the spectacle this time, the first time, but in reality, it's not that good," and it takes away from the greatness of the movie. Now, again, and I know there's parameters with making certain movies and so forth, but so I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm still not sold.
Okay.
Like, okay, because I asked you for like what are like good examples, what's bad examples. One bad example you gave me was the Avatar mech knife when you were putting this, we were getting this together.
Yes.
And I don't see how that doesn't fit this whole rule of cool issue. Why you're like, "Oh, well, this takes me completely out of it," compared to sliding, a shield down some stairs or sliding off an Oliphant, or running up brick. Like what? Like, okay, I actually get the running up bricks thing. That was a bit too much, but the comparison is what I don't get. Is like, how do you know it's too far? Because then this is my issues too. Is like it kind of just starts becoming like a judgment of subjective enjoyment.
So yes, okay. So this is a good point. So the rule of cool, I will say, I do believe it to be pretty subjective, right? I don't think it's like an objectively great thing that usually you can get universal sign off all the time on, right? But I don't really, I've talked about this before, I don't really care about objective. Like I'd rather be useful than right, if that makes sense. Like, okay. I think being right about things, I think being technically correct isn't as helpful to anyone as being useful. Like, or being, so like there's all sorts of examples I could give of this, but the long and short of it is it's better to have something that's usable and that's applicable and that's you can act on than it is to have like, well, I get to be objectively correct in my little like corner over here where it's like technically you might be right, but it's not really useful to anyone, right?
I feel personally attacked right now, but continue.
Well, the other thing is objectivity is really, really hard to get to. Like, I believe there's objective things out there. I think it's super duper rare, and it's like you're getting to the level of like physics, right? Essentially, and even then, something can be literally correct, and there can also be a sub like truth to it, right? So like you can literally be I'm made of flesh and bone, but then that flesh and bone is actually made of cells, and those cells are made of atoms, right? Like, so you can be literally objectively correct on multiple levels, but it doesn't mean there's not a sub truth, right,
Yeah,
within there.
but
So,
but you're saying, okay, this is not objective, it's subjective.
right. So this is more of a subjective thing, but the fact is
Okay.
it's still a rule, right? The rule exists, even if it's not a hard and fast rule, right?
And
It's
so
it's an idea. So
why is this
the
knife
mech knife
not
is
part of
hilarious
it?
to me. Okay, so the mech knife is so funny to me because it's something most people never even notice when watching Avatar. And James Cameron sort of has this magic that I seem to be immune to for some reason. I wish I wasn't because everyone loves him so much, but he does this thing where he pretty much relies like very heavily on the rule of cool, and it works for most people in the audience. And even like people that like are very like consider themselves like serious film critics will be like, "Oh, Avatar was brilliant," or "Avatar 1 was brilliant," or they'll be like, "Terminator 2 was brilliant," or "Aliens is brilliant." And I disagree. I think all those are not as good as the first ones, the originals.
Wow, shots fired.
Yeah, and I think Avatar is kind of complete trash. And I know many film critics that like love Avatar, but one
You're
of
not
the
going to hear too much argument
yeah,
from
yeah,
me
yeah.
on
One of
that.
the reasons
Yeah.
why it falls apart for me is there's all these moments in it, and the mech knife was like the cherry on top, but like you see this, he loses his gun, right, and then he reaches behind him and he pulls out this mech knife. Well, that makes sense if I'm me and you and I pull out a knife. But in order for this thing to exist, somebody had to go to a forge and like forge this giant mech knife. And they're like, why wouldn't you just give the mech a knife built into its hand? And they're like, no, 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 that's not going to work. We have to go and build a Bowie knife that has like these like tactical like elements to it, right? Like it has like a
Yeah, that's a
serrated
good
top
point.
edge, which is like not good for any of this stuff. Like this should literally just be a spike if it's just going to be a weapon for a machine to have. Like the serrated edge is so you can like saw through stuff, or like and then the sharp edge is for stabbing and slicing, right? Like, and instead you have this like crazy, and then it has like shapes cut into it to make it lighter, right? So it's like a more practical. But I don't know. It's like this idea of somebody sitting here in a forge building this giant blade per mech to like go on the equip standard issue is hilarious to me. There's also a point where in the movie starts with him like wheeling himself out with like a regular old wheelchair, but then they also establish there's like mechs walking around and hovercraft, and it's a wheelchair that like we already have smarter wheelchairs than this wheelchair. Like when the movie came out, it was like I don't know what year, 2008 or something, and we already
Yeah, yeah.
had like electric wheelchairs. It's not like that's a new invention. And then he's sitting here in like this hand row like you know wheelchair from back in the day, like pre 1990s wheelchair. And you're like, dude, like we have better wheelchairs than this now. You don't think when we have like hypersleep we're gonna have better wheelchairs than that? And then making gigantic clothes for them is hilarious to me too, because they're like 11 feet tall, and so they all have these gigantic clothes. And then he gets lost in the woods, right? I forget the main character's name, and there's all these dogs coming around him, and he starts lighting matches. But then that means the matches are like 11-foot tall matches. So somebody on Earth is sitting here developing matches for the deerie or whatever they're called, like type size people. Like, well, in case they ever get lost in the woods and they don't have a flashlight, but they need a match, like it makes
So
no
okay,
sense
so
to me at all. So that's
yeah,
why
so
the movie
there's
doesn't
a
work.
lot effectively.
Yes.
There's a lot of stuff, not just the McKnife. Okay.
Yes.
All right. But okay. Again, though, so this is why, and this is what bothers me about it, is like the idea of being like, oh, it's just subjective. It's like, well,
Right.
okay, but like you have to have some sort of standard of when it is good and when it is bad, because you can't just say, well, I just feel like
Right.
it wasn't
Right.
good. It's
Well,
like, well,
so
that's
that's
nice, but like
yeah.
your movie criticism is terrible. I don't care what you have to say,
Right. Right.
which you can say to people. But people get really mad at that.
Yeah, so I think when it comes to being um I don't know if you're ever going to find a perfect example of when like what I'm trying to establish is the parameters that generally make it work. I
Okay.
don't have like a hard and fast rule of this is what makes it works, right? I think one of the things is um obviously like I said establishing the rest of your world in such a solid way that like I just remembered four more from Avatar, like unobtainium, and then like the planet's methane, and methane's insanely
We don't.
flammable.
We're moving on. We're moving on.
Yes, we should move on. But I'm just like remembering this just how many there are, and that was just like when I was in the theater, the cherry on top was just the neck knife. I'm like, oh, okay, this I can't take this film seriously. But
Okay, so what are these parameters
so
that you think people
one
should use?
one of the parameters is obviously like have the rest of your world so solid. Have the like that's I think the mech knife would have worked if everything else was so solid. But like I said, when you're ticking off like thing after thing after thing, the whole thing falls apart, right? So like use it sparingly would be the next rule, right? As part of that, like have it be earned, earn these moments of trust with your audience where you say, hey, look, I'm not insulting your intelligence, right? I'm consciously doing this because I think it's worth the vision in my head is worth breaking a couple rules. However, I'm not going to do it so often that I'm thinking that you're such an idiot that long as it's cool, you'll always accept it, right? I'm not going to treat you that badly. I'm also not going to treat you so badly as to have this be the only thing my film's relying on, right? Which is sort of, again, my argument against Avatar is it's sort of solely relying on, but it's so pretty, but it's so cool, but it's so magical that I don't really care about any that it's just Pocahontas, that it's, you know, all this other stuff, right? I sort of feel insulted. I feel actually extremely insulted watching Avatar because when they use the word unobtainium, I'm like, okay, dude, you're just telling me I'm an idiot. Like, right? Like, I'm just like, but so don't insult.
It is the worst name you could possibly give anything.
You're insulting your audience's intelligence. You're saying you like this thing, I can just name it. Like, so you know, don't do that. And the fact that it worked kind of makes me really mad because he's proven sort of right. Like I'm the minority that's bothered by this. And so he's like, well, the audience is that dumb. And that's what I get all the time. So when I talk to like video game producers and other people, they'll say this stuff all the time. And it kills me when I talk to the money, essentially, the corpos, is they'll go like, well, if we change.
Now I'm really being attacked.
Well, no, not you. But they'll be like, as an artist, you'll say like, hey, this is the idea. This is the thing. And they're like, it doesn't move. It doesn't change the budget. Like it doesn't change it doesn't translate to sales. Right. So you'll say like, hey, there's this thing. And, you know, fans really say that they really respect it if you don't do a bunch of pre-order tie-ins or they don't like DLC or whatever. That's like this way or that way. I've said this. I've literally been in a conversation with a game producer telling him about this. And he's like, yeah, it just doesn't it doesn't affect sales. Like, so people don't actually put their money where their mouth is. You can say all these things, but it doesn't actually do it. And you're like, ugh, but like it still matters though, right? And so it's sort of like when you see a James Cameron someone do this, and you're like, and you say something like, hey, dude, don't just have the rule cool. Like use it sparingly. Don't just have like we need 4 more explosions for the trailer. You'll get this feedback of being like, fans don't care. They just care if it's Timothée Chalamet in it. Then that's what they care about, right? And this idea of quality comes last is sort of the way that a lot of these guys look at it, because it's like they'll see a scene and you're like, well, if we spend like X more time and dollars on the scene, it could be way better visually, it could be more interesting, the story would make more sense with it. And they won't look at any of that. They'll just go like, well, that obviously is going to cost too much and it doesn't result in the product being any more valuable, the IP or whatever it is. So like, I don't care. And like oftentimes they don't care about quality. Like if something's financially successful, the quality isn't a reason to not make it again. It's kind of funny to me. Like there's all sorts of things that I think, look, dude, let's not make another Fast and the Furious movie or whatever because the quality has dropped off so hard. And they're like, the money has it, so we're gonna keep making them, right? And you're like, but don't you have any like respect for the quality? Don't you have any like idea? Like, don't you want the IP to continue to be worth something? Because like you can only ride the coattails for so long. On something like that, right? So back to the rules though, is like use it sparingly, right? Even if other people would say, hey, let's throw in 2 more explosions or whatever because it's worth it. I think respecting the audience's intelligence is a big one. Like there's ways of doing things that is so obviously stupid, and you're to try to trick your staff and everybody like, no, don't worry, this is gonna work. Like I really hate it when that happens on a film set or in a production where it's like, well, we're not going to get away with this, guys. Like let's not pretend the audience isn't going to know what we're doing when we do this or that or this other thing.
So kind of, because it feels like you've kind of been mentioning these multiple times. So
Right.
I want to try to break it down. So it's like, okay, so like you think that the parameters for using the rule of cool
Hmm.
is that you have to actually build the world to be consistent with the rules of the story.
Yes. Yeah.
So like your story needs to,
You have to have a
you've built these
strong
rules.
base. You can't,
Yeah.
without a strong base, you can't jump off
Okay.
into the unknown, right? You
And
like that's
then
just ridiculous.
you part of that though is also then respect your audience's intelligence. Like
Right.
respect what they know, and that if you have bad writing or if you have a bad foundation, that this isn't gonna suddenly make the story better, or people are going to forget about the story of like, hey, this movie sucks. Oh, but that scene, like that one thing was really cool and it redeemed everything, and now I'm gonna convince people to go and see it.
Right.
Like if that happens, it's rare. And
Right.
then the last one is kind of use it, like you said, use it sparingly. So if you're gonna break it, you can break it, once or twice, a couple times. But if you're Avatar and you're breaking it 100 different times, it's not gonna work out. Which honestly, I would love to see. I remember seeing Avatar, and I
Mhm.
will say this: I remember being in the theater, being like, "This is amazing," and I was not enamored with 3D at the time,
Yeah.
and I was like, "This movie is going to be terrible." Like it's because the story for me was the first thing. I'm like, this movie's
Hmm.
going to be terrible, and it's not going to do well with at-home sales because people are going to go home and watch it and be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
this isn't the experience and the spectacle that I had the first time, so it's not going to carry over." So that kind of makes sense. So trust them, respect their intelligence, use it sparingly. That's kind of like the big three
Well,
parameters. There's nothing. You think those are the three?
those are the biggest. The one exception to this is
Oh boy.
or or know what you're doing and use it like way more. The worst thing you can do, I think, is be like middle ground with it, right? I think you should use it very, very sparingly. That's generally what works best. Or be John Wick and just be like, look, guys, we're just doing this. This is what this movie's about now, is just being cool. And understand you're not going to make like a great story, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
this is what this is about. And people like I show up for those. So we've talked about Underworld. We've talked about these movies that are just like they're not good films. I would never say that Underworld is a great narrative, but it's a fun ride, right? So they then know you're making
Yeah.
a ride. But the hard part is where I get insulted, I guess, is like the Star Wars Episode 8s of the world, where really you can't decide if you wanted to make a fun ride or if you wanted to be taken seriously and try to like be a narrative that I'm supposed to care about, right?
Okay.
And that's the worst thing you could do. The worst thing you could do is go like, yeah, we're gonna have Luke drink this milk and be like, oh, like and the rule, like that's a good example of the rule of cool too, right? It's like it could be for a laugh, it could be for a joke, it could be for a whatever, and it's like, okay, so this is a funny movie. We're making a funny movie now. Okay, I can be in for a funny movie, and then you're like, but now she's talking to him in the dark, and it's sad, and you should be serious, and you should care about her feelings. And I'm like, oh, okay, we're making a serious movie now, right? Like never in Empire Strikes Back do we have someone drinking milk and then like burping or whatever. And like I get that that happens a bit in Star Wars. Like Star Wars does have that magical line where it has like these little funny creatures eating each other, or like a little funny thing happens,
I
but it uses it better. Like there's a better way
yeah.
of doing this.
I would argue that scene with drinking the blue milk isn't necessarily the problem. Is that's comedy. It's a problem that you're kind of it's depicting
Like
a
yeah,
hero, a
right,
heroic
right, right,
character
right.
as a very in a very bad position, and it's kind of
Yes.
destroying. It's actively destroying the hero that people really loved. So
Yeah.
yeah, but that's neither here nor there. We don't need to go down that rabbit hole because
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
going
yeah.
to be a whole long episode, I'm
But
sure.
but the fact is, I think episode does this multiple times where you have like the holo maneuver, right? And that's something
Yes.
that's extremely cool. For a lot of people, it worked. For a lot of people, it didn't work, and it was solely riding on that like visual of it shooting through and splitting all the ships, right?
Yeah.
And so there's some people that one scene is like worth it for what it did to like the universe's logic and all this other stuff, and there's people who it's not worth it, right? So that's sort of like the subjective nature of it. But I think why the film now I feel like everyone, not everyone, but there's generally a consensus that it's not great. Right when it first came out, before Episode 6 came out, it was like, oh, it is doing stuff new. Oh, there's this stuff, but like generally, I think why there's a consensus that that's not great is, and it's not like only the rule of cool broke it, right? But I think one of the problems is they couldn't figure out what they wanted the tone to be. Is this serious? Are we going to be killing off beloved characters? Is this going to be something I'm supposed to like be really into and emotional about, or are we we have porgs being roasted on spits, and there's all sorts of these funny little moments, and it's supposed to be a not serious
Okay.
comedy,
So
of errors.
yeah, and I have something that it's slightly off topic.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep it real short, and then we can talk some roles and rogue stuff.
Okay.
I don't know if you actually had. It sounds like from our talks before we started. It was
Yeah.
been pretty busy,
I've
so
been
that's
slammed.
fine if we don't
I
have
actually
anything
did get a
amazing.
lot of various things done, but they're not stuff that's really like super exciting to show
Showable.
or talk
Yeah,
about.
okay. It's like, hey, I really polished this. And you're like,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. There's been some
It
polishing.
looks the
There's been
same as last week,
some
except nicer.
physics setups and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well then, I will end it on this.
All right.
That was something so I finally watched Thor: Love and Thunder, and
Mm.
I am one of the few people who did not like Thor Ragnarok. I
Right.
thought it was funny. I enjoyed it for what it was. I hated the movie the minute that I watched it. I was
Okay.
the entire time I was just like, I don't like this.
I have a really
I'm
interesting.
laughing. I don't like this.
I have something very. Yes. Okay. Go on.
Okay.
Go on.
So I watched Thor: Love and Thunder, and I couldn't understand at first. Like in my brain, I was trying to like rectify. I'm like, okay, people did not like Thor: Love and Thunder, so there's a lot of factors that can go into that.
Mhm.
I've heard superhero fatigue, which I kind of get. People are kind of getting done with the whole Marvel
Mhm.
thing. I think the issue was this: Thor Ragnarok. What the reason why I hated it was the reason why Thor: Love and Thunder also didn't work.
Right.
And what I mean by this is Thor Ragnarok has no catharsis. Anytime there is about to be a serious moment,
Right.
it's killed by comedy. So there's
Right.
no serious moments whatsoever. It's just constant. And people really thought that was funny because it was like it was subverting their expectations.
Right.
This is what normally happens in a movie and you're used to it and you like it.
Right.
The reason why people hated or didn't even want to go see Thor: Love and Thunder, one is past movies they'd seen that were Marvel that were just like, I'm not excited for this.
Right.
But then on top of it was that when you did see the movie and when you do watch Thor: Love and Thunder, they have those serious moments, but they're still punctuating it with those same jokes.
Mhm.
So you're so you're sitting there be like, like this isn't funny because this is a serious moment right
Right.
now. So this joke actually isn't landing. It's no longer funny because it's not just subverting my expectations. You're just making inappropriate jokes at inappropriate times when I'm supposed to be feeling one way. You're now
Well-
just being like, oh, well, we're going to change this. And it's because you don't actually respect what's going on.
Well,
Like,
yeah.
you don't
yeah.
care what's going on as a filmmaker.
So here's what happens. I always get worried when I see a film do this, right? And it's usually like one of the most popular films. So what happens is you'll have an established narrative. You'll have an established like world and rules and characters and all this stuff, and so it starts to become predictable. So then someone does a deconstruction film, right? They do a film that's deconstructing it or subverting it, and everyone loves it because it's like, oh, it brought new life into this. But the real thing that's happening is you're not bringing new life into the movie. You've just killed it. So what often happens, so there's a good joke, which is, explaining a joke is like dissecting a frog. I can do it, but then you kill it in the process, right? And it's the same thing with a film or a story or a universe. Is if I go and deconstruct this thing, it's now dead, right? I've killed it, and then they go, well, let's make another one. Well, you can't make another movie subverting all the same things because they've already, now it's no longer subvertive. So you can't go back to the solid storytelling because we've set up the expectation that no, we're actually going to subvert that stuff. So this is a great example of this is episode 8 again. Is like you literally just killed that trio of movies by undoing everything the first episode did. You now can't have an episode 3 because either you have to try to piece it back together again, which we saw what happens when you do that is like, no, the frog's already dead, or you have to continue down this, like, we're going to subvert the subversion, right? And like, that's very, very hard to pull off and almost impossible. So like, that's what happens whenever I see a Deadpool, whenever I see them, like, you kind of get like one, maybe two of these if you're lucky, but you got to be really careful with them. And the fact that like every studio right away after they make like one successful thing, and it's like, now let's do the inverted success, like ironic version of it. And you're like, it'd actually be better if you stuck to just let the story be over. That's one option, and make a new story. Mm-hmm. That's usually what should happen with things. Or B, what you could do is stay true to what made this thing, right? So a better example of this might be like Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick, right? Is essentially, it's like, hey, rather than inverting, like what I was worried about when they came up with the idea of Top Gun Maverick, and I was like, oh boy, here we go. I thought what they might be tempted to do is, let's invert this whole film. Let's like make Tom Cruise, he's now incapable of doing stuff, and now there's a new, and he has to like, and that actually can be a good movie. I'm not saying, like, we both agree we kind of enjoy the first of the Thor Ragnarok is like a movie itself,
Oh,
but what it's done, well, you enjoyed watching it, right? But what it
I
does to
laughed at
the
the
thing as a
comedy, but
whole,
yeah,
it can be
continue,
effective. It can
continue.
be an effective story, right?
It can,
But then what
yes,
you've done is destroy that any idea of continuing to exist in this universe, right? Because
true. Yeah,
you've gone and said, oh, all the rules about you should care about this, or this character's serious, or this character's like, all of these are going to be like the idea of like, I'm really worried about this with the latest Deadpool, right? Let's say they make Wolverine into a complete joke, right? Now it should have just ended at Logan. It's such a beautiful ending for his like Hugh Jackman's career as Wolverine. Being able to say goodbye to that character in such like a meaningful way is wonderful. And now let's say you bring him back, and now let's say he's a butt monkey, right? He's just this like butt of all these jokes. Imagine trying to make another
so
Wolverine now. You're gonna be like, well, that's the guy I just saw be an absolute
okay,
dork,
okay.
right?
So here's actually what I think they're gonna do with Deadpool and why I think it could work.
Right. I think he's gonna be a straight man. I hope. I hope they play him
I
straight.
think that they're gonna
But
uh make Hugh Jackman's Logan the straight man of the
right,
film, the capable, kind of like what like you see like Josh Brolin in Deadpool 2,
right,
similar type thing. And then Deadpool's the joke the whole time throughout, which is fine.
right,
And then what they're going to do though effectively is they're going to use this as like the reset of the MCU,
mm-hmm.
and basically they're going to try to use that as a way because I'm sure they've done some rewriting
Right,
since most of these movies have been coming out and it's been in development for so long. They can probably be like, hey, we're gonna do a bit of a reset, and this allows us to possibly bring old characters back, or it allows
right,
us to change like the Jonathan Majors Kang. They can now
right.
bring somebody else into it. So I could see them doing something with that
Yeah,
that can actually work. But I agree with you. With something like Thor, it's like you had a serious film that was uh, vibes of Shakespearean
right,
type of drama, something that was actually of serious nature that was pretty
right.
interesting. Same thing in the second one.
Well,
It was
it's North
bit more.
mythology, right? It's
Yeah,
like
yeah.
yeah, yeah,
And then you had the joke, and then you could have gone back to, okay, now we can make it serious again, but they didn't. And it's like, okay, well then you're out of luck because I can't look at this character and be like, yeah, this is
right.
exactly what I want to see because it's not a heroic character
Well,
anymore.
and when you deconstruct something, the problem with deconstructing is you have to have something been constructed to deconstruct it, right? You can't
Yeah.
just have so you can't deconstruct a deconstruction. It's already taken apart. And
All right.
so we'll wrap up on that. But yes,
I was gonna
exactly.
say
Yeah.
we're starting to get off,
So
but you're
that's
yeah. We will absolutely do an episode on deconstruction
that's
versus
a
construction.
fun topic that we should have had as a separate topic. Yes,
Yeah,
but it is.
we
But
will. Yeah,
I do think you're right that it ties into the rule of cool because that's where I've always said this. But like James Cameron kills series, right? Like he's the
yeah,
death like of it because he also does that, right? He just takes and inverts it. He goes, "Oh, look, the Terminator's now the good guy. Oh, this is now the bad guy." Right? And then Aliens versus Alien, the same thing. Oh, the android's now the good guy, right? Like, so it's just like he just flips the story, and then from there, it's like you get handed this thing. You're like, "Well, I can't flip it back, and I don't want it because that's just going to be like, which is actually what you should do." But then what
yeah,
people look at is the success of the two, because two is usually more successful than one, right? Is they go, well, what made it successful is all the lampooning, all the like adding in more aliens, and then the answer is, well, you should actually return to form. But what happens usually is people go, well, let's flip it again, and then you just end up getting into these like messes of like, well, now there has to be 50,000,
okay,
robots and whatever. So,
yeah,
anyways, so we'll wrap on that.
yeah. I'm still not
Fun week.
completely sold, but it's a much more. I'm open. I'm much more open to the to this idea
Right.
now.
Well, I think
I do
yeah,
see your parameters, and I
having the
recognize they
rules.
make sense.
I think one last thing that's very, very helpful is if you have, I think why it works best in a short film sort of context to just rely only on cool. Like that's why I brought up Hidari, is like if they don't know what all the rules are, you don't have to really worry about breaking them too much. So it gets
That's
like
true.
it gets harder and harder to like not jump the shark the farther you go because you've established all these things. But when nobody knows like what this character can and can't do, you kind of have a lot more freedom in like in the first iteration of something, or especially again if it's small, to just like not explain anything.
You have
And
less
that's
rules to break.
that might be a topic for next time because we're getting too long. But I do really want to talk about um it will be next time because we need to end. But either explain everything or explain nothing. That's the next one.
Yeah, that's definitely a future episode.
Explain
I
everything
can see
or
that.
explain nothing. And it's essentially the Star Trek versus Star Wars, right?
All
Either
right,
that's your two options when you're making a sort of a sci-fi or magical world.
all
All
right.
right.
So we're gonna leave it off there.
Yep.
appreciate everybody who has watched this and enjoy it. Go ahead and subscribe if you like to see any more of these. If you enjoy the tutorials, hit those up as well.
Alrighty. Peace out, everybody.